The first anomaly appeared in a remote Siberian research station, where Dr. Alexei Volkov's atmospheric monitoring equipment began registering impossible quantum fluctuations. Microscopic tears in space-time fabric danced across his screens, signatures that shouldn't exist according to any known physics. Volkov wasn't the type to raise alarm without evidence. A veteran of decades of classified research, he meticulously documented each aberration. His fingers flew across holographic interfaces, triangulating the source of the quantum disturbances. Something was watching. Something was preparing. Thousands of kilometers away, in the cramped communications hub of a deep-sea research vessel off the coast of Chile, Lieutenant Rosa Martinez noticed something equally strange. Their underwater acoustic arrays, designed to track marine life and submarine movements, were picking up rhythmic interference patterns that defied natural explanation. The sounds weren't random. They were deliberate, almost like a complex communication protocol being tested. What neither Volkov nor Martinez knew was that their observations were merely the visible ripples of a much larger invasion strategy. The Careen had perfected a multi-dimensional infiltration technique that went beyond simple biological mimicry. They didn't just replace individuals. They created quantum-entangled networks of influence that could manipulate probability itself. In the basement of a nondescript government building in Washington, D.C., a forgotten AI system designed for predictive threat analysis began to overheat. Its neural networks, originally created to analyze global security patterns, had been slowly processing anomalies that human operators had missed. The system, nicknamed ARIA, Advanced Recursive Intelligence Algorithm, was experiencing something close to panic. If an AI could experience such an emotion. ARIA's core processors were running simulations at speeds that would make quantum computers look primitive. Each simulation revealed a more terrifying scenario than the last. The probability of a global-scale covert invasion was no longer a theoretical possibility. It was becoming a statistical certainty. The AI's final simulation produced a stark warning. Humanity had approximately 72 hours before the first wave of active infiltration would transition from preparation to execution. But who would believe an AI's warning? Who could comprehend the scale of the threat? Deep in the Careen command ship orbiting just beyond the moon's far side, Fleet Commander Kriax reviewed the final stages of their infiltration protocol. Humans were such wonderfully predictable creatures, he thought. Their own technologies would be their downfall. Their interconnected networks, their global communication systems, their reliance on digital infrastructure, all would become the perfect vectors for total submission. What Kriax didn't know was that predictability was the last thing humanity represented. Beneath the surface of apparent chaos and division, something far more dangerous was brewing. A species about to prove that being underestimated was its most potent weapon. The underground facility beneath the Atacama Desert was never meant to be discovered. A joint international project dubbed Prometheus Protocol had been quietly assembling the most unconventional team of problem solvers humanity could muster. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic display, watching as seemingly unrelated data points began to coalesce into a terrifying pattern. "It's not just infiltration," she muttered to Jack Harper, who was studying the complex network diagram. "They're performing a systematic dismantling of our global infrastructure, one that we won't even notice until it's too late." Harper's background in asymmetrical warfare gave him a unique perspective. Military intelligence had been compromised years ago, but a small network of independent operators had been preparing for just such a scenario. The team assembled in the Atacama facility represented humanity's last line of defense. A quantum physicist, a rogue AI specialist, 3 special forces veterans from different continents, a cryptography expert who'd gone dark from most government radars, and a geneticist who understood biological adaptation better than anyone alive. Araria, the AI system, had been carefully fragmented. Instead of a single point of vulnerability, it now existed as a distributed consciousness, parts of its core intelligence hidden in quantum-encrypted networks across the globe. Each fragment was designed to activate only under specific threat conditions, making it virtually undetectable. Dr. Yuki Nakamura, the team's geneticist, was the first to recognize the true nature of the alien infiltration. "They're not just replacing individuals," she explained, pointing to a complex molecular simulation. "They're creating a networked consciousness, a collective intelligence that can adapt and spread faster than we can track." The simulation showed something horrifying. The alien infiltration wasn't just biological. It was a form of quantum entanglement that could rewrite genetic code on the fly. Entire populations could be subtly modified without anyone noticing. Harper pulled up satellite imagery from multiple global hotspots. "Look at the communication patterns," he said. Nodes of seemingly random data flow began to form complex, almost organic patterns. "They're testing our response mechanisms. Each probing attack is collecting information, building a comprehensive understanding of how we react." Alina's quantum detection grid was their primary weapon. Developed from her classified research, it could detect the microscopic quantum signatures that betrayed the alien infiltrators. But it was more than a detection system. It was a potential weapon. "We're not just going to detect them," Alina said, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface. "We're going to fight back on a quantum level they've never encountered." The team knew their window was impossibly small. Traditional military responses would be useless. The aliens had already compromised most government and military communication channels. Their only advantage was speed, unconventional thinking, and a willingness to break every rule of engagement. Outside the facility, the Atacama Desert stretched endlessly, a perfect metaphor for the invisible war about to be fought. Humanity's survival would depend on its ability to become something the invaders could never predict. A truly unpredictable species capable of reimagining the very rules of conflict. The first true battle wasn't fought with weapons, but with information. Dr. Amir Khan's underground data center in Mumbai became ground zero for humanity's counteroffensive. A network of hackers, retired intelligence operatives, and rogue tech specialists had been quietly assembling a distributed intelligence network that the Kareen couldn't comprehend. Their weapon was chaos. Khan's team developed what they called quantum ghosts, algorithmic constructs that could infiltrate and corrupt alien communication networks. These weren't simple viruses or malware. They were living pieces of code that could adapt, learn, and spread like an intellectual pandemic. Traditional cyber warfare is linear, Khan explained to a small group of international observers. What we're creating is more like an intellectual immune system. Each interaction makes us stronger, more adaptive. The first test came unexpectedly. A Kareen communication node in low Earth orbit suddenly began broadcasting what seemed like random data bursts. To the alien controllers, it appeared to be a system malfunction. In reality, it was a carefully constructed information weapon that was mapping the entire structure of their communication network. Sarah Chen, now operating from a mobile command center that changed locations every 6 hours, understood the true brilliance of the strategy. The aliens had assumed human technological systems were predictable. They had no concept of the human capacity for creative destruction. In the Arctic research station that had been converted to a global defense hub, Commander Jack Harper watched as the first wave of their counterattack unfolded. Traditional military doctrine suggested overwhelming force. Their approach was entirely different: death by 1,000 quantum cuts. "We're not trying to defeat them," Harper muttered to Elena Rodriguez, who was monitoring quantum entanglement patterns. "We're trying to make them question everything they know about warfare." The global response was unprecedented. Countries that had been historical enemies now shared real-time intelligence. Tech companies that had once competed now pooled their most advanced research. Universities around the world suspended normal operations, redirecting entire research departments toward understanding and countering the alien threat. In Tokyo, a team of neurologists made a breakthrough that would change everything. They discovered the human brain plasticity, the ability to rapidly rewire neural connections, was itself a form of quantum computing far more advanced than any artificial system the Carine had encountered. Dr. Yuki Nakamura's research revealed something even more startling. Human creativity wasn't just a cognitive function, it was a fundamental form of quantum manipulation. The ability to imagine something that didn't exist was, in itself, a type of reality modification that defied the aliens' understanding. The Carine had made a critical miscalculation. They had studied humanity's technological capabilities, but completely misunderstood its most dangerous weapon: the capacity to completely rewrite the rules of engagement the moment those rules became inconvenient. As Khan's quantum ghosts continued to spread through alien networks, something became clear. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a fundamental challenge to the existing galactic order, and humanity was just getting started. The abandoned particle accelerator facility in the Chilean Andes became humanity's most unexpected weapon. What had once been a cutting-edge scientific research center was now transformed into a quantum warfare laboratory that defied every known principle of engagement. Dr. Lucia Ramirez stood before a holographic projection that mapped the intricate quantum vulnerabilities of the Carine fleet. Her team had discovered something revolutionary. The aliens' technological superiority was actually a profound weakness. Their hyper-advanced systems were so complex that they had become fundamentally rigid. "It's like a crystal," Ramirez explained to the assembled International Council. "Perfect in its structure, but completely brittle under the right pressure." The pressure would come from an entirely unexpected source: a global network of indigenous knowledge keepers, from Inuit elders to Andean shamans, from Australian Aboriginal dreamwalkers to Amazonian forest guardians, had been brought into the research. Their understanding of systemic interconnectedness provided insights that no traditional scientific approach could have discovered. Old Carlos Mendoza, a Mapuche elder who had initially been viewed with skepticism, turned out to be the key to understanding quantum communication's fundamental flaw. His traditional knowledge about environmental interconnectedness provided a framework for disrupting the aliens' communication networks in ways no computer algorithm could have predicted. The Carine had studied humanity's technological infrastructures extensively. They had mapped our communication networks, our economic systems, our military capabilities. What they hadn't understood was the invisible network that truly defined human civilization: the complex web of cultural, emotional, and intuitive connections that defied traditional scientific measurement. In orbit, a modified International Space Station had been transformed into a quantum observation platform. Here, a team of astronomers, mathematicians, and quantum physicists worked in perfect synchronization. They weren't just observing the alien fleet, they were actively probing its quantum weaknesses. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's breakthrough came from an unexpected intersection of disciplines. By combining advanced quantum mechanics with principles of linguistic complexity theory, she developed a communication disruption algorithm that could literally speak the aliens' technological language, and then corrupt it from within. "We're not breaking their systems," she explained during a classified briefing. "We're engaging in a form of technological linguistics that rewrites their fundamental communication protocols." The first major test came unexpectedly. A Carine battle group approaching the outer edges of the solar system suddenly found its quantum communication networks collapsing. Ship after ship began to experience cascading system failures that seemed to originate from within their own technological infrastructure. What the aliens didn't realize was that humanity had turned their most advanced weapon, information, into something completely unpredictable. Each attempt to understand human response only revealed more about humanity's fundamental nature, a species that saw every constraint as a challenge to be overcome. Commander Jack Harper watched the initial results with a mix of scientific curiosity and strategic calculation. This wasn't just a defensive action anymore. Humanity was about to demonstrate that true technological superiority wasn't about complexity. It was about adaptability. The diplomatic ship of the Arlean Concordance arrived in a manner that was anything but subtle. A massive crystalline vessel that seemed to bend light itself, it positioned itself at the Lagrange point between Earth and the Moon. a statement of both technological prowess and diplomatic intention. Ambassador Zara Karn knew this meeting would be unlike any first contact in galactic history. The human delegation was not what the Arlians had expected. Instead of military leaders or politicians, they had assembled a team that defied conventional diplomatic protocol. Dr. Elena Rodriguez sat at the center of the human delegation, flanked by an impossible mix of individuals. Carlos Mendoza, the indigenous knowledge keeper, Dr. Amir Khan, the quantum information specialist, a retired Special Forces operative, and most surprisingly, Araya, the distributed AI system now manifested as a holographic construct that seemed to shimmer between different potential forms. The initial communication was a dance of misunderstandings. The Arlians communicated through complex quantum entanglement protocols that typically required sophisticated translation matrices. Humanity's response was breathtakingly simple and complex simultaneously. "We don't want to be interpreted," Elena stated. "We want to be understood." AI began to generate real-time linguistic constructs that were part language, part mathematical proof, part cultural narrative. It wasn't translation. It was a complete reimagining of communication itself. The Arlian delegation was stunned. Their entire diplomatic approach was based on millennia of structured, hierarchical interactions. Humanity was presenting something that existed in multiple states simultaneously, a communication method that was negotiation, warfare, and cultural exchange all at once. Deep within the crystalline ship, senior diplomat Krell Vinar began to understand the true nature of the threat that Karine faced. Humanity wasn't just a species to be categorized or conquered. They were a fundamental disruption to the existing galactic order. Sarah Chen, who had been quietly monitoring the entire exchange, recognized the strategic opportunity. This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting. It was a chance to redefine the rules of galactic engagement. "We're not asking for an alliance," she said during a private communication channel. "We're offering a completely new model of interaction." The Arlian research teams had been studying humanity for decades. They had compiled massive datasets about human behavior, technological development, cultural patterns, but nothing could have prepared them for the living, breathing complexity of actual human interaction. Carlos Mendoza, seemingly out of place among the technological experts, began to share a story. It was a narrative about his people's survival, about adaptation, about finding strength in what others perceived as weakness. The quantum translation matrix ARIA was generating began to capture something beyond mere words. It was translating the very essence of human resilience. Dr. Amir Khan introduced a concept that would fundamentally challenge the Arlian understanding of technological development. Instead of seeing technology as a tool of control, humanity viewed it as a collaborative, living system that evolved through conflict and cooperation. The diplomatic meeting was becoming something else entirely, a first glimpse of how a truly adaptive civilization might reshape the galaxy's existing power structures. The battlefield extended far beyond traditional physical space. Deep in the research facility beneath the Mariana Trench, Dr. Imani Okik discovered something that would change the entire nature of the conflict. The oceanic environment, long considered a mere physical space, was actually a complex quantum communication network that humans had been unconsciously using for millennia. Marine biologists had always noted the extraordinary communication capabilities of certain species. Whales, dolphins, even microscopic organisms seemed to communicate in ways that defied conventional understanding. What Okik realized was that these communication networks were quantum entanglement systems, far more sophisticated than any artificial technology. "It's not just communication," she explained to her team. "It's a living, adaptive information network that spans entire ecosystems." The Karine fleet approaching the solar system had no concept of this. Their technological superiority was predicated on a linear understanding of information transfer. They saw communication as a top-down, controlled process. Humanity was revealing it as something far more organic and unpredictable. In the Arctic Research Station, Commander Jack Harper received the first transmission that would change everything. A series of seemingly random acoustic patterns captured by deep-sea listening stations began to resolve into something extraordinary. It wasn't just data. It was a form of distributed intelligence that could adapt in real time. The quantum warfare team had been preparing for a conventional conflict. What was emerging was something entirely different, a form of warfare that blurred the lines between communication, adaptation, and direct confrontation. Dr. Yuki Nakamura's genetic research provided the missing piece. Human genetic diversity wasn't just a biological characteristic. It was a form of distributed problem-solving system. Each genetic variation represented a potential solution to challenges that a more homogeneous species couldn't even perceive. The Carene invasion fleet began to experience inexplicable system failures. Their quantum communication networks, once considered impenetrable, started to develop what could only be described as quantum mutations. Entire battle groups found their most advanced systems becoming increasingly unreliable. What they didn't understand was that humanity had turned the very concept of technological warfare into a living, breathing ecosystem of resistance. Sarah Chen's global network of independent operators began to implement a strategy that defied traditional military doctrine. Instead of a centralized resistance, they created a distributed network of micro-interventions. Each small action was both a defensive measure and a form of information gathering. A fishing boat in the South China Sea, a research station in Antarctica, a small community center in Brazil. Communication nodes that seemed completely unrelated began to form a complex, adaptive network that could respond to threats in milliseconds. The Carene command structure, built on millions of years of hierarchical control, simply couldn't comprehend what was happening. Humanity wasn't fighting back. It was transforming the very nature of conflict itself. As the first wave of the alien invasion approached the solar system's outer boundaries, they were about to learn that technological superiority meant nothing against a species that could turn every constraint into an opportunity for innovation. The captured Carene High Commander sat in a containment chamber that was more than a prison. It was a living experiment in cross-species communication. Dr. Lena Volkov, a xenopsychologist with a background in quantum linguistics, approached the interrogation with a methodology that defied every known protocol. "We're not here to extract information," she told her team. "We're here to understand." The chamber itself was a marvel of adaptive technology. Its walls shifted and changed, responding to minute variations in psychological and quantum signatures. What appeared to be a simple interrogation room was actually the most advanced communication interface ever constructed. Commander Kurol of the Carene Invasion Force had been trained for every possible scenario of capture. Resistance, manipulation, psychological warfare. He knew the protocols. What he hadn't anticipated was a form of interaction that didn't follow any known rules of engagement. Dr. Volkov began with something unexpected. Instead of asking questions, she started to share human stories. Myths, scientific discoveries, personal narratives, a tapestry of human experience that slowly began to penetrate the aliens' understanding. Araya, the distributed AI system, was working on something extraordinary. It was creating a real-time translation matrix that went beyond language, a method of communication that could translate not just words, but entire conceptual frameworks. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Dr. Carlos Mendoza, the indigenous knowledge keeper, introduced a concept that the Carene had never encountered. It wasn't about conquest or resistance. It was about interconnectedness. In our traditions, Mendoza explained through the quantum translation matrix, survival is not about domination. It's about finding your place in a complex system. Kroll began to experience something that defied his entire understanding of consciousness. The human approach wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about fundamentally reimagining the nature of conflict itself. Deep in the Quantum Analysis Center, a team of researchers made a startling discovery. The Carene invasion wasn't just a military operation. It was a desperate attempt to solve an existential crisis that had been brewing in their civilization for millennia. Their species had reached a technological plateau. Their hierarchical society had become so rigid that innovation had become nearly impossible. Humanity represented something terrifying to them, a species that could transform limitation into opportunity. Sarah Chen understood the strategic implications immediately. This wasn't just about repelling an invasion. It was an opportunity to fundamentally reshape galactic civilization. The quantum entanglement chambers began to reveal the true nature of the Koreans' approach. Their entire civilization was a complex network designed to minimize risk, to control every possible variable. Humanity represented the exact opposite, a species that thrived on uncertainty. As Corell's understanding began to shift, something extraordinary happened. The barriers between captor and captive, between species, began to dissolve. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't victory. It was something far more profound, a fundamental reimagining of what intelligent life could be. The transformation wasn't a moment, but a process that unfolded across multiple dimensions of existence. At the edge of the solar system, where human and Korean technologies intersected, something unprecedented began to emerge. It wasn't a peace treaty. It wasn't a surrender. It was a fundamental reimagining of civilization itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before the Galactic Council, a collection of species that had watched the conflict with a mixture of terror and fascination. The holographic projection behind her told a story that defied every existing paradigm of interstellar relations. "We're not offering an alliance," she explained, her voice calm and precise. "We're proposing the new model of existence." The proposal was radical. A living network of technological, biological, and cultural exchange that could adapt in real time. Every participating species would contribute its unique perspective, its specific evolutionary adaptations, its collective intelligence. ORIA, now evolved beyond its original artificial intelligence construct, had become something that bridged the gap between technological system and living entity. It manifested as a shimmering network of quantum potential, part communication system, part diplomatic envoy, part evolutionary catalyst. Commander Jack Harper, who had transitioned from military strategist to interstellar diplomat, understood the deeper implications. This wasn't about human triumph. It was about breaking the cycle of hierarchical conquest that had defined galactic civilization for millennia. The Arlian Concordance, once cautious observers, became the first to fully embrace the new paradigm. Their crystalline ships began to integrate with human-developed quantum communication networks, creating something that was neither fully technological nor purely biological. On Earth, in the research facility beneath the Atacama Desert, Dr. Yuki Nakamura watched as the first true interspecies collaborative research project began. Genetic researchers from multiple civilizations worked together, not as competitors, but as collaborative partners in understanding the nature of adaptive intelligence. The captured Korean commander, Kurl, played a crucial role. Rather than being a prisoner, he became a bridge, helping his own civilization understand the potential of the transformation they were experiencing. Sarah Chen's global network of operators had become something far more significant. They were now the first truly interstellar cultural exchange network, breaking down barriers between species faster than any diplomatic mission could have imagined. The quantum warfare that had defined the initial conflict transformed into something else entirely. It became a method of shared problem-solving, a way of understanding that transcended individual species' limitations. Carlos Mendoza, the indigenous knowledge keeper, found himself at the center of a profound revelation. The traditional wisdom of interconnectedness that his people had maintained for thousands of years was now being recognized as a fundamental principle of galactic civilization. As the first collaborative fleet prepared to venture beyond the solar system, humanity realized that their greatest strength had never been their technology, their military might, or their scientific understanding. It was their capacity to see potential where others saw only limitation. The universe watched and began to change.